to help.
Coming together to find solutions.
We are going to do something about it.
Their stories are our stories.
Welcome to Eye on America.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
When it comes to the money you spend every day, we have you covered every morning. Making money makes sense. Weekdays on CBS Mornings.
The workplace has shifted after 3 years of COVID. What it means for your pursuit of happiness. Join me on Primetime.
Stream live on the free.
Americans can rest assured that our banking system is safe. Your deposits are safe.
Whenever a bank, especially one like Silicon Valley Bank with billions of dollars in deposits, fails, it's clearly a concern.
Florida was doing great long before Ron DeSantis got there.
When you have a record of achievement, people can call you a name, but that's not going to trump the achievement.
His number of favorability is 74% compared to President Trump's 80%.
Welcome to Red and Blue. I'm Caitlin Huey-Burns in Washington. Thank you for joining us. President Biden is reassuring Americans that the U.S. banking system is secure following the collapse of two banks. Silicon Valley Bank failed last week, sparking concerns the situation could snowball into a nationwide banking crisis. Depositors were able to access their funds when the bank reopened today. Another bank failed over the weekend, this New York-based Signature Bank. The U.S. government is covering those customers' deposits as well.
Look, the bottom line is this. Americans can rest assured that our banking system is safe. Your deposits are safe. Let me also assure you, we will not stop at this. We'll do whatever is needed.
So for more on this, CBS News Chief White House correspondent Nancy Cordes joins us now. And Nancy, it was notable that the president made this statement at 8 a.m. before the markets opened. What was the Biden administration trying to accomplish with this speech today?
They had a couple of goals, Caitlin. First of all, they wanted to prevent any runs on any other banks by assuring Americans that their deposits are safe and that the federal government is standing by if anything happens. Because as we saw on Friday, even if a bank is more or less fiscally solvent, if all of its customers try to take their deposits out at once, you are going to have a very bad situation. That's something that he wanted to avoid by pointing out that the individuals and companies that had their deposits at Silicon Valley Bank will remain whole. They will not lose any of their deposits. Notably, what he did not say is that if any other banks fail, that individuals and companies at those banks will get the same courtesy. And we've asked the White House multiple times today what the situation would be if any other banks were to fail. What we've been told time and time again is that they are keeping an eye on the situation. They are completely focused on the couple of banks that had to be taken over by the FDIC on Friday and then again over the weekend, and that they'll cross that bridge when they come to it.
Yeah, that's such a big question, and whether this will incentivize, any sort of risky behavior as well. And Nancy, also, can you kind of take us behind the scenes of how the White House dealt with this? I mean, this is something that broke on Friday. We know that the Treasury Secretary was on our air yesterday. But take us behind the scenes about how involved Biden was here in making this decision.
Sure. So White House officials insist that he was speaking with top economists and economic officials all weekend, most notably his Treasury Secretary, of course, Janet Yellen, the chair of his National Economic Council, Lael Brainard, and his White House Chief of Staff, Jeff Zients. They also say that he was on the phone with the governor of California, Gavin Newsom, because obviously Silicon Valley Bank is located in California. We've learned through our own reporting at CBS News that the Treasury Department actually started to have some concerns about Silicon Valley Bank's situation way back in the fall. What we don't know yet is how long ago the White House and the president himself were alerted about this situation, if ever, or if they were only brought in last week when things started to get really serious. White House officials say that they worked throughout the weekend to try to deal with this situation because they were so concerned about the markets opening today. And you saw, despite the president's speech, that there were wild gyrations when it comes to all kinds of banks, even banks that were completely fiscally sound, like Charles Schwab, Bank of Hawaii. At one point, those trades had to be halted for a time. So there's still a lot of jittery investors out there.
Yeah, it's still a lot of questions for the White House and for Congress about what happens next. Nancy Cordes, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it. Now let's bring in Major Garrett. Major, of course, is CBS News chief Washington correspondent. And in that role, you have covered financial crises before.
All the way back to the savings and loan crises of the early 1990s. So, yes. Okay. So a wide span of instances where regulators, Congress, and administrations have to intervene. And this is another example.
So this is another example, but how is this different from 2008?
Okay, we're all traumatized economically and psychologically by what happened in 2008 and 2009. Look, and I'm not a financial analyst or an expert, but I do have some experience with what happened then and how it differs from what we're going through now. Back then, there was a system-wide problem of financial institutions getting involved in purchasing or reselling what were called collateralized debt obligations, essentially mortgages wrapped up into financial objects that were sold on the market and repurchased. And everyone was in on that. And when those began to collapse in value, everyone was affected by that loss, that immediate loss in the value of an asset they thought would continue to appreciate. And that created a domino effect throughout the entire financial system. That's why Congress had to intervene so dramatically, and bailouts became a toxic word in terms of politics. This is a set of institutions, one very specific kind, Silicon Valley Bank, that has customers in the venture capital world, and then one in New York. There is no sense that anyone has currently that there is a domino series that are going to fall because of their investment structure or the way they do business or the way others are attached to their methods of doing business. So that's one thing that has got the administration and Congress taking a bit of a sigh of relief. This does not look like a systemic risk situation. There is the psychology, of course, of security. And if people with deposits begin to get nervous, that psychology can take on a life of its own. That's why the administration stepped in so rapidly. The president spoke this morning, but the fundamental news that he conveyed was conveyed yesterday, giving all the markets, not only in America, but in Asia and Europe, time to digest that. And when they calmed down, essentially they were volatile, but there was no crashing anywhere, not in the Asian markets, not in the European markets, not in the American markets. That is an early sign of stability.
Now, what's interesting here, too, is that you mentioned the term bailout has become this politically toxic word. It has really started, to shape politics after 2008 in both parties. You've had these kind of populist elements.
Sure.
But what's just interesting today is that you're not seeing a lot of blowback from Republicans here, for example. I mean, you're actually seeing some bipartisan support for at least this action that was taken over the weekend.
Congress is involved in this process. Dodd-Frank is a piece of legislation passed in the aftermath of the 2008-2009 collapse that essentially sent two incentives in this situation. One, depositors, you're going to be safe, and there was an insurance fund created to create more safety, which is what this administration has used to guarantee deposits over $250,000. That's the FDIC insured amount. And then the other incentive is to investors and boards of directors. You don't get protected. You have to monitor your bank, because if you don't, you're not going to get bailed out and you're not going to be held harmless. You're actually going to be held to harm on what you've invested and what you can be sued for. So the incentive structure is fundamentally different than it was between 2008 and 2009. Congress, having written that legislation, is seeing it work out and finding that it is holding this situation and the system together as intended.
Now, in terms of going forward, I mean, lawmakers say, Maxine Waters, who we're going to talk to in a little bit, has said that everything's on the table. But you've also had Republicans who have blamed kind of the Twitterverse for this, right? The reactionary element of this, and think that the regulations in place are enough. How does that dynamic kind of shape itself out in terms of the politics?
As you know, Caitlin, social media touches everything in our lives. It touches journalism, it touches law, it touches ethics, it now touches the financials. Because if you have this in your hand, you can get panicky information about a financial institution. Right. And with this in your hand, you can move your money. That was not true in 2008 and 2009. That's fundamentally different. So that's part of this ecosystem, what people hear and how they react with their money and their psychology through this device. The other component part of this is, does Congress need to reevaluate how regional banks are held to standards that larger banks are not? Larger banks have to hold larger capital reserves in case there is a quote-unquote psychological run. Regional banks are held to a less aggressive regulatory standard in that way. Do you need to reevaluate that? All of that will be revisited.
And that'll be interesting to see how that is revisited in a divided Congress, but at least some members on the same page, at least in terms of some action needing to be taken here. I do want to switch gears a little bit because we just have some new reporting from our political director, Finn Gomez, who is actually traveling with former President Donald Trump today in Iowa, and he was asked about Michael Cohen, calling him a sick person, he says. He was a convicted felon and he's a convicted liar. That's what he says. So does that sound like someone who is nervous about testifying?
Well, it certainly sounds like someone who has talked to his potential defense counsel about how to portray Michael Cohen. Mm-hmm. And if you remember, Michael Cohen's convicted of lying on whose behalf? Mm-hmm. Michael Cohen's, yes, but not nominally, but directly, former President Trump. Who was he was his fixer. Who was he fixing things for? Mm-hmm. Michael Cohen, yes, nominally, but principally for former President Trump. That matters.
We will see that unfold. Thank you very much for covering all of that for us, Major Garrett. Good to see you. And these are the first major banks to fail since Congress made changes to the banking rules after the 2008 financial crisis, as Major just mentioned. The highest-ranking Democrat on the committee that oversees the U.S. banking system, she'll join us next to explain what Washington needs to do to prevent another failure. You're streaming Red and Blue, reporting across the political divide.
Hey there, welcome to the Uplift.
I thought she was a groom, and I stepped back and I went, oh, you're the queen. She's gonna be with me every instant that I'm alive.
I just wanted to see if you'd go to Disneyland with me today. I look over at him and he's smiling.
I'm gonna remember that the rest of my life.
They told us when he was gonna be born, he was only gonna live for 30 minutes. It's really a miracle that he's with us today.
The Uplift. Stream now on the free CBS News app.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
On our places, bright, shiny faces.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my two good friends, and we talk about the world.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
I always tell people that Twitter would not be Twitter without Black Twitter. It's just us being in fellowship with each other.
And it becomes a conversation you don't want to be left out of.
People really started to recognize the power of activism on Twitter.
Based on that one tweet, the hashtag #OscarSoWhite was trending around the world.
If anything has really powered Black Twitter, it's been humor.
If your food ain't right, oh, we're gonna tell you about that too.
We tend to create change, create culture and cool.
That's how movements happen on Black Twitter and go beyond more than that.
Black Twitter, the Twitterverse that changed a generation. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
You ready?
A generation of kids opens up on CBS Reports.
I just want to be like a regular kid.
Their world, their struggles, their voices.
What if I was white?
A lot of people like to call names and make you feel ashamed for being proud of who you are.
Now streaming Gender.
I did not realize that you could change your gender.
Realizing how you feel.
You can be a boy, sometimes you feel like a girl, sometimes you feel like both.
Redefining who you are.
Identify as trans.
Gender fluid.
Non-binary and queer.
Is the idea of gender a thing of the past?
And to be yourself, always, no matter what anyone says, I love you.
Are the kids all right? Gender. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Stories that inform.
Or you can be really old at 60, and you can be really young at 85.
Inspire.
How do we unlock the power within ourselves to be who we want to be?
And brighten your day.
The best part of fame is making people feel good. Always send the people home happy.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
The news doesn't have to always be depressing.
What do you love about running?
It can be uplifting. That human connection that we create on the broadcast every night is incredibly important.
Welcome back to Red and Blue. The Treasury Department briefed members of Congress Sunday night. Senate Banking Chairman Sherrod Brown and the highest-ranking Democrat on the House Financial Services Committee, Congresswoman Maxine Waters, released a statement saying they will aim to focus on strengthening guardrails for the largest banks. So for more, Congresswoman Maxine Waters joins us now. Good to see you. Thank you for being here. A lot to get to. The biggest question I think a lot of people have is that the government says that this won't cost anything for taxpayers, but how is that possible? I mean, couldn't banks just pass this on to their consumers who are also taxpayers in some way?
Well, actually, we're very fortunate that we have a federal insurance program that protects, depositors up to $260,000. But that is premiums that are paid in by the banks, and it is well funded. And so that's where that money is coming from.
But is there a way that these banks could somehow pass that on to the consumer?
Well, you could think that way when you think about businesses and you think about how they earn money. You can think that they could raise prices, et cetera, but we see no signs of that at this point at all. The money was there. It's in the insurance fund. It's been paid for already, and we don't see any way that that's going to increase taxpayers at this time in any way.
And do you think that all regional banks like SVB should be given this same federal backstop? And do you think the government should insure all unsecured deposits? I mean, even those beyond that $250,000 mark?
Well, we have basically done that at this point for the uninsured. We not only have assured the depositors who are insured and those who are not insured in this emergency. And so we're going to have to think about what we're going to do in the future. We're going to have to think about whether or not we're going to look at a plan that will insure all depositors, a partial plan, what have you. We need to take a look at what has happened, all of our experiences. We need to be, we're going to hold hearings very soon. And whatever legislation we need to do to ensure the public so that the public can have confidence in our banking systems. And so we're going to try and do what is necessary to make sure that our banks are safe, sound, and secure.
So essentially what you're saying, though, is that you could imagine a scenario in which all regional banks are covered this way.
Sure, I could imagine that scenario. It's only an imagination at this point, because when you get to these kinds of policies, the same people that you saw involved in this extraordinary effort to do what we have done to make sure that there was no real contagion, we talk about it, we talk through it, everybody has something to offer, and then we'll come up with final solutions. So it is not one person, it is, the feds, it is the FDIC, it is the Treasury, it's the White House, it's the Congress, and we figure out what we have learned, what we have done, and what we need to do. It is a collaborative effort.
With that said, I mean, are you concerned that the government stepping in here to protect those depositors might encourage or condone these banks to take greater risks?
No, as a matter of fact, we'll look at how we define risk now. I'm going to be wanting to have whether or not we're going to get back into stress testing and how that's done. But risk will be taken, a good review of. And so I'm not worried that things are going to slip through. I think we're going to learn from our experience and we're going to come up with solutions. What we did in a short period of time is extraordinary. What the American people saw was the government working, people working together to solve a problem and avoid a catastrophe. And I am just so pleased about that. Everybody from the president, again, to the feds, to the secretary of the Treasury, and to Gutenberg over at the insurance agency.
Yeah.
And I think that should be seen as a very positive thing. What is possible for government to do to solve problems?
And as I mentioned, you are the ranking member of the Financial Services Committee. The chairman, Patrick McHenry, said that this is the first Twitter-fueled bank run and that he has confidence in our financial regulators and the protections already in place to ensure the safety and soundness of our financial system. Do you agree that that is true? And what else can Congress do to prevent this from happening again?
Well, Mr. McHenry and I are going to be holding our first hearings, and we're going to form those hearings based on the information that we think we need in order to move forward and ensure that we have the strongest banking system that we can possibly have. And so we have not done that yet. We'll have our hearings. We will be talking with the various agencies, and we will make sure that we cover everything that we can possibly cover to ensure, again, that we don't have a systemic failure in our banking system.
Elizabeth Warren has attributed this to the rollback of regulations in 2018 under the Trump administration. Do you agree with that?
Well, let me just say this. The rollback was troublesome for me and some of us who worked on Dodd-Frank reforms. However, we have to take a look at what is happening in our world today. For example, we have these startups. They are different in terms of seeking out support and loans. We have banks that don't deal with them directly because they don't understand some of this creativity, and it's not easy for the startups to get loans. And what we saw was Silicon Valley Bank that was the go-to bank for these startups, and they were able to support them. Many have become successful. They have created jobs. The bank was handling payroll, and we wanted to make sure that the people and the staffs that are in these startups get paid, and we've done that. And so I think we're going to look at all of this, and we're going to make some decisions. I'm not at any conclusions now about what we will do, what we won't do, but I am very much focused on and believe that we've done an extraordinary job in a short period of time, and that we will work to see if we have to redefine risk, if we need to have more stress tests, and whether or not we need to make sure there's not the kind of deregulation that would cause a collapse by a bank.
All right, we will look forward to those hearings, certainly. Congresswoman Maxine Waters, thank you for your time. We appreciate it.
You're so welcome, and thank you.
And in the last few days, Republican voters in Iowa have heard from Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis, and tonight they're hearing from former President Donald Trump. We'll talk about how he's already faring with the top pollster in the state. You're streaming Red and Blue.
An original documentary from CBS reports. Controversial Congressman George Santos.
Why won't you answer our questions?
How did he manage to get elected?
Thank you very much, and God bless you, and God bless the USA.
George Santos' campaign was a campaign of deceit, lies, fabrication.
And who is he, really?
I knew him as Anthony DeVolder from Queens.
Really, who he is, he's a fraud.
I compare him to the Tinder swindler.
From people who know him, the truth, the facts, the lies.
He would say that he was worth $100 million.
It's an incredibly cynical episode in American politics, beyond satire.
Had you ever seen anything like this?
No, and I hope I never see it again.
Campaign of Deceit, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
She dazzled on the court and off the court as a businesswoman.
Thank you for joining us on Person to Person. Tennis superstar and entrepreneur Serena Williams.
an original CBS Reports documentary.
I asked my students, what are we going to do about racism in the United States?
The backlash over teaching about racism in American schools.
I don't think it has any place in the classroom.
We can either pretend and say, no, we're not racist and we're all great people, or we can actually start to do the really, really hard work of addressing it.
How did you lose your job? I made the statement that white privilege is a fact.
Is it helping diversity and inclusion?
When you bring in different people's stories and experience, it enriches education.
If you don't talk about something, it doesn't go away.
Or driving us further apart?
What schools are doing to our children in the name of anti-racism is in fact teaching them racism.
The intention is to put us in this war against each other.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now. An original CBS Reports documentary.
I was entitled to equal pay for equal work under the law.
Does the Supreme Court's power need to be checked?
9 Supreme Court justices, 5 of them said no, she's not entitled. That's not right.
Calls to fix the court tend to go along with the politics of the moment.
Republican-appointed justices have all tended to go in one direction, with the Democratic-appointed justices tending to go in another.
Even though it's only 9 justices, it takes 5 of them to make the law of the land.
Does it have political impact? True. Political intent? Probably not true.
If the American people don't trust the judgment of their court, that's a real problem for our democracy.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings.
Welcome back to Red and Blue. Former President Donald Trump is in Iowa. He is giving a speech on education in Davenport, and it comes just days after Florida Governor Ron DeSantis visited the same city. A new poll has his favorability numbers among Iowans, with Trump at 80% favorability rating and 74% favorability rating for DeSantis. And for more, let's bring in Jay Ann Selzer. She is the president of the Des Moines-based polling firm Selzer & Company. Great to see you. Thank you for being here. So walk us through this new poll. What stands out to you?
Well, it's really a poll that delivers some tea leaves more than anything that's very definite. We wanted to get an early take on what was happening with some of the current and potential Republican candidates. So we pulled out just Republicans to take a look at favorability. Former President Donald Trump is still performing very well in a state that he won twice and convincingly, so that's not a surprise. What was a surprise is that Ron DeSantis actually had a pretty good favorability number for not being a relative newcomer. He was in the state over the weekend, but his number of favorability is 74% compared to President Trump's 80%. And you might think, well, that's maybe more of a convincing difference for the former president, but there were 20% of the people who couldn't rate their feelings about Ron DeSantis, which means he had a higher proportion of people able to rate him who liked him. So that's one of the key findings. The other kind of jaw-dropper finding is we repeated a question from 2 years ago that asked how likely it would be that you would vote for former President Trump if he were the Republican nominee. And 2 years ago, 69% said they would definitely vote. Now, this is just Iowa Republicans. This time it was 47%. So quite a drop in terms of that rock solid support we had seen in the past for President Trump.
So I'm curious kind of what this may tell us about Iowa and its impact on the Republican Party field and the role it kind of plays in shaping that field. I mean, how much does Iowa matter for Trump? You mentioned, of course, that he won the state twice in the general election, but he wasn't able to win those caucuses in 2016, went on to win the nomination. Does he have to win Iowa to move forward? How critical is it for him this time around?
Well, apparently, winning Iowa is important, and it's always important to do the thing that candidates want to do most, which is win something. And if Iowa is the first place to win, that can, in fact, catapult into a greater showing down the road. But it's not the be-all, end-all, and depending on how many candidates get in to the field, then it can be tricky and a little treacherous for some of those candidates to get established here, get known here, get the local political operations active, get staff working, and make all that happen.
It's interesting, those numbers that you pointed out for DeSantis, at least suggesting there is an interest in him. What does Iowa provide for a candidate like that, who is essentially a newcomer when it comes to presidential politics?
You know, my observation has been that the Iowa experience makes candidates better. And that's because they are expected to, and often do, meet people repeatedly on more than one occasion. The people will come out to the events, and they want to sit down, they want to talk about things, and they want to ask questions that are on their mind, and then they want to take the measure of the candidate. So it's if the candidate uses Iowa well, then they can adjust how it is that they're coming across and up their game, just polish themselves up.
Yeah, it really helps to shape those candidates as they move forward. Just quickly, too, I mean, Democrats are not going to be prioritizing Iowa this time around. I'm wondering if that would have any effect on the Republican field.
Well, that could go either way. I think what we don't expect is for there to be a Democratic caucus happening in Iowa at all. That's as we sit here today. So I would think it would have minimum effect. But there are, you know, I don't know how big the segment is, but there are sort of people who are fans of caucuses. They just love the event in and of itself. And so it could be that there's some independents who might have chosen to caucus on the Democratic side in the past. You can change your party registration on caucus night and show up and participate.
It is a very fun and eventful type of way to get to assess the candidates. Ann Selzer, we will be talking to you a lot and watching your polls very closely. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
And that does it for us today. You can stream Red and Blue Monday through Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern. You're streaming CBS News.
In today's Money Watch, business analyst Jill Schlesinger is here to help.
How do you even begin to make the best use of your